Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmaedeke, and today we are brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for over 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche and of this podcast. And today it is Monday, so it is weekly check-in with the Colorado Rockies, who are coming off a series loss to the White Sox, which we will dive into with Luke Zahlmann. Luke, quite a weekend in the south side of Chicago for the Rockies.
Yeah, I think you forgot an adjective. You're talking about the gangbusters White Sox, the absolutely, killer White Sox. They're as good as could be as what I saw this weekend at least.
So there's a 4-game gap between those two teams. White Sox have 24 wins. Rockies have 28. Like you mentioned, though, the Rockies won that 7-in-a-row streak that kind of distorted their lineup. But we were just talking. The Rockies win on Sunday, striking out 21 times. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, I mean, and don't get me wrong. I think striking out 21 times is just pretty inexcusable as a major league team.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, 14 innings, but they were almost or at their season high, I believe, after 9 innings. So it's not like the 14 innings, those extra innings are what really boosted that total. They were already right on the edge of it, and you're going against the White Sox. So I understand, you go against one of these elite pitching staffs, right? Like a Cleveland who has this bullpen who's, one of the best bullpens we've seen in decades. I understand something like that, but you're going against the White Sox who are made of scraps. I mean, you have Mike Soroka yesterday is the guy who came in and threw four innings, struck out 6. Mike Soroka was good about 4 years ago. He's not good now.
I remember that name, but he's not.
Yeah, like he was good for the Braves. He had some neck stuff. He had some injuries. So he hasn't been the same guy. And then, he comes out and he looks like Nolan Ryan against the Rockies. I just don't really it's very puzzling, I think, to see just how inconsistent it is. And I wrote a lot about it yesterday in my recap, in that they just don't have winning habits. They are not a team with winning habits. It's one thing to lose, and it's one thing to lose while also not having winning habits. And at some point, they're going to have to develop habits that are going to build on each other and hopefully bring wins. And I don't know. I just haven't really seen it this season. They had that 7-game win streak, but like we talked about, that looks more and more like a fluke every day. I mean, that just seems to be everything came together all at once, and it was like seeing a shooting star. I mean, it's truly, puzzling how that ever happened.
I don't know if I mentioned, but the Rockies did win yesterday.
They did. Yeah. So that's the worst part, right? Is that they won while doing this. And you think, you went 14 innings, you gutted your bullpen right before you're about to have a 4-game series against Milwaukee, 3 games against KC. So not the worst teams in the world. And you just obliterated your bullpen because your lineup couldn't get hits when it mattered. And that's just how this stuff starts to snowball. Now they're going to go into today, and you have a very taxed bullpen, and you just have to hope your starters can stay in games. Well, now you're back at Coors Field, where starters, you could get 2 innings and 7 earned, or you could get 6 innings, 3 earned. You really have no idea what you're going to get. So that's how this stuff really starts to snowball.
They had 6 hits in 14 innings. Oh my!
Yep.
I guess I didn't dive too deep into this box score, but holy cow! Like, how big is the difference between the White Sox and the Rockies? Because you and I were talking off air. It's not that big of a gap.
It's very minimal. I mean, the gap is, I think, name value. You look down the Rockies roster, you see, oh, I know this name. I know this name. Oh, that's a name I know. But as far as actual production and actual just on-field performance, the gap is very small between these two teams. And like you said, the 7-game win streak has kind of shifted that to where people think, well, the White Sox are clearly the worst, and then there's kind of a tier up. I just don't believe that. The Rockies got swept by in Miami, and they lost series to Oakland, Washington, and now Chicago. That's worst team in the league material. They're losing to the worst teams in the league. And I don't know how else you could justify that. I mean, yes, you beat some good teams during a streak where everything seemed to be going right. But when you're underperforming and you're getting 6 hits and striking out 21 times against the worst team in the league, I think that really illustrates what the true talent and production of this lineup and this team is.
The White Sox thing is really interesting to me because how long ago was it they were like this young up and coming team in the playoffs? Like it's been what 4 or 5 years now?
21,
21, so not even that far ago.
2021, I believe, was when they were in the AL division series. They lost, but they were there. That you think about Eloy Jimenez, you had
Yeah.
Yohan Moncada, you had Luis Robert, you had some really good pitching during that stretch as well. And now they're going into another trade deadline where the rumors are they're going to get rid of all their good players again, and that's just kind of a very weird cycle. They have one of the worst contracts in the league in Andrew Benintendi, but they also have two of the most valuable trade deadline pieces in Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet. So you just see these real rebuilding teams, and you figure at some point it's going to turn. But I do think there's also just tendencies that these losing organizations have that the longer they go without ever changing those, the more the results are going to stay the same. And I think year by year, that's what it's starting to feel like with the Rockies.
All right, so we are going to dive into a little bit of the first half. We're about halfway through the season. Disappointing to say the least. I don't think we expected much, but there's still been. I mean, Nolan Jones struck out 5 times in 6 bats yesterday. There's stuff like that, but there's been some good things. So we're going to start. Most valuable player for you for the Rockies for the first half.
Well, it's really a debate, right? Because you
Yeah.
have two guys on the left side of the infield that could both vie for that. But my pick is Ryan McMahon, and it's mostly because you talk about a guy who set the record in strikeouts last year for this franchise, was burdened with really carrying the lineup when Chris Bryant was out, when Charlie Blackmon was out, Brendan Rodgers was out. I mean, he really had to carry everything. And this year, he's just been so consistent, especially with 2 outs with 2 strikes. He's just been a very, very good hitter. He's been probably the best third baseman defensively as well. So I don't think you're wrong if you choose Tovar, but it does feel like Ryan McMahon has, in some ways, and you're seeing this shift. You're seeing it shift from Charlie being the guy in the clubhouse to Ryan very slowly. And obviously that's going to, that will speed up once Charlie is gone. But I mean, you are starting to see that shift of this is becoming Ryan McMahon's team. And he's a guy who had to sit in the shadows of Nolan Arenado for a really long time. So it is kind of encouraging to see what he's able to produce now that he's kind of the guy.
I picked Tovar. I think he got paid, and then he's really shown it this year. And I think that, like we've talked about, like they were talking to him at 16 or whatever it was, and like I just think I like the McMahon pick, honestly, because like you said, that those strikeouts last year were so bad. So bad.
Well, and what's a little tough is the strikeouts are up again this year. He's starting to strike out a little more. So, like I said, if your argument is Ezequiel Tovar, I don't think you're wrong at all, because Ezequiel Tovar is maybe one of the most dynamic players they've had in a while. I mean, yes, they had Nolan. Yes, they had Story. I would say that Tovar more leans towards the Story side because of
Yeah.
the speed. I mean, he's able to impact the base paths. He's able to get that extra base with his speed. He has amazing range. I don't even think it's arguable that he's the best defensive shortstop in the league. So you're looking at a guy that is manning the hardest position in the infield and is just doing it so well at such a young age. I mean, he's 22 years old. It's pretty ridiculous what he's doing. And so by no means do I think that's wrong at all.
And I guess now, like we'd kind of debated about this, but Ryan McMahon is part of the Rockies' future now.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like this year, especially after his hot start, if there started to be rumors about trading him, you would have kind of gotten your clarification of, he's not going to be that guy for them. But when they came out and, every report is they have no plans to trade him. He's signed for multiple years. I just think that they see him, like I said, as the new Charlie Blackmon. He's a very calm guy. He doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. And that's what you need out of a leader. And so I think he's a really elite leader. And I think Tovar is also a leader, but he's more of a leader for the younger guys coming up.
Yeah.
I mean, Adel Amador said that it was kind of funny. He said he compared him to a grandpa, not even a dad. He was like, he's kind of like a grandpa. He's just so mature. And Tovar, it's like, yeah, he's 22, but he has a child. He has a family at home. He's a very mature 22-year-old. I mean, I just wouldn't think there's many 22-year-olds in the league that have kind of a centeredness that he has, and you can see it play out on the field.
All right, so we're going to flip to least valuable, which I think we know the answer. And it's funny, we're doing this on Bobby Bonilla Day.
Yep.
Yes, so I think this is perfect. Least valuable. I think we're going to agree. I'm going to throw another name out there, but go ahead.
I mean, to me, it's Chris Bryant. I mean, he has just, and I think the word joke feels a little extreme, but I think the way his tenure has gone with the Rockies has kind of been a joke. I mean, it's if it's not one thing, it's the other. And so he crashes into this wall. They say, oh, he has a rib contusion. Looks like he's probably going to be the minimum. Well, then the report comes out a couple days later. Oh, well, he also has an oblique strain, and his back is also still hurt. And it's like, at a certain point, you start to really question, I guess, the toughness. I mean, it's hard to question a player's toughness,
It's
but
hard.
when you watch Brenton Doyle run full speed into the center field wall, it's still dented to this day. You can still see where he ran into the wall. He hit it so hard. And yet he has missed, I believe, like 3 games this year. And he has knee tendonitis. It's not like he is not also dealing with stuff. But I think in some ways you start to lose the respect of the guys in the clubhouse. And I think Chris Bryant's in a really weird spot for them. And I just looked up contracts because I thought, man, where does he stack up in annual value? And that makes it look even worse because he's about $1 million short of Freddie Freeman, and he's getting paid more than Bryce Harper, Jose Altuve, Aaron Nola, who just signed an extension this offseason. So if you want to argue, well, Harper, that contract was a little while ago. Okay, that's a fair argument. But Aaron Nola just signed his extension, and the amount of value he brings to the Phillies versus the amount of value Chris Bryant brings to the Rockies. I mean, you're talking about the Grand Canyon. That's a gulf. So it's just, it's truly one of those situations where a team tried to avoid embarrassment from the Nolan Arenado trade, brought in what they thought to be a new face, and basically doubled down on the embarrassment. I mean, if they had never brought someone in and they had just rolled with young guys, that would have looked so much better than what it looks like right now with Chris Bryant basically just collecting checks without ever playing baseball.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be Chris Bryant, but I'm going to throw. I know Nolan Jones had some injuries, but there was a lot of this. I mean, you wrote how he could be the next promising Colorado sports star, and he's hitting whatever it is, 186, something like that. He was hurt, but it's never clicked this year for him.
No, and that's totally fair as well. I mean, he's always struggled early in season, so he wasn't that great in spring training. It's funny because he actually got a home run stolen away that I saw in person when they were in Arizona. The game got canceled, I believe, in the second inning. He hit a home run right before it got canceled. So I guess his numbers could have been just that tiny bit better. But he just hasn't looked he's looked calmer since coming back from the injured list, but he just looks a little frazzled. It looks like he's trying too hard. And so you wonder if the pressure from, hey, you're going to be that guy, you wonder if that got to him a little bit. Because if anything, I think coming into this year, you thought, well, Nolan Jones is this, up-and-coming superstar. Tovar is an up-and-coming star. And in many ways, they've reversed roles. I think Ezekiel Tovar looks like the superstar in waiting now. And Nolan Jones looks like he's a really good player. He produces, he produced a lot last year, has as much this year. But I guess in some ways you might be seeing why an organization like Cleveland would give up on a top prospect like that. Because when you watch him run, field, throw, I mean, you're like, this is one of the best athletes I've ever seen. Right. And you think he could have been, his route could have even been professional hockey. That's what type of athlete he is. And it's just, whether it's injuries, whether it's pressing too hard, whatever it may be, it just doesn't seem to come together. And so it came together last year for a stretch, but this year he just really hasn't put it together. And so there's still time for him to do it, obviously. I mean, in some ways he's still adjusting back after the injured list. But I mean, that he has a good case too. I think the financial side of it is obviously what tips it into Chris Bryant's, side. But you're right. Nolan Jones has kind of been a little bit of a disappointment this year, given what people, including me, thought that he might be.
Well, Chris Bryant just doesn't play.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, he's missed 59 of 83 games this year. In 3 years, he still has yet to play 162. So in 3 years worth of games, he hasn't played one season worth of games yet. And I mean, you could argue, I don't know if you had to put a betting market on it, the next 4 years, the odds of him playing 162, not including his first 3, but just over the next 4 years, him playing 162 games, I don't know which side of that I would bet, because it really feels like this is only getting worse. It's not getting better. And you do wonder, at what point does it become so bad that they say, we just can't have this guy around anymore? Like, this just is not going to be productive for a winning future. And you could argue, if they had more money, the time already passed for that. But it is an organization that doesn't tend to cut its losses that way. So, I mean, it's one of the biggest embarrassments in baseball.
This would take research. I think this is something we should all do as a Denver Gazette sports staff, but just worst contracts in Colorado sports history. It's got to be, I don't know if it's one, but it's got to be close to the top.
Well, it's him, it's Russell Wilson, it's, the Rockies have had quite a few bad ones. Yeah. I mean, they lucked out. Well, and they lucked out with the Desmond one, because he gave back the final 2 years of that contract when he left. He said, you know what, with COVID and then the year after COVID, he didn't play. So he said, you know what, I'm just going to forego the rest of this. And that just doesn't strike me as something Chris Bryant's going to do. And honestly, I don't know that I hold that against him. I don't know that you can expect players to sign deals and then basically give up the money, especially when there's a players association. They kind of have to look out for their fellow players. I think it's easy to say, well, if you have any pride, you'd probably just give the money back and you'd say, you know what, I haven't been worth this. But I can also see it of, you guys signed the deal. You signed me to this contract. It's not my, it might be a little bit my fault it hasn't worked out, but it takes two to get a deal. It's not like he held him at gunpoint for that contract.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to look at, because, yeah, like you said, Russ is up there. The Broncos, Dale Carter for the Broncos back in the day was a one. I'd have to look at the Nuggets more. All right, let's stay on the Rockies here, though. Most surprising.
Surprising, I think Tovar, you could say his just leap is there, but I think it's Bretton Doyle. When you look at a guy who, yes, he won the Gold Glove last year, but he hit 203. I mean, he was the questions I think going into this offseason were, is his bat going to come along enough for the glove to be worth it? You kind of, and now he's at a point where you think, man, is he their second best player right behind Tovar? And to think that the Rockies might have Doyle, Tovar locked up the middle. I mean, you're talking about the two most important defensive positions, and they have arguably the two best defensive players in franchise history at those positions right now. And so for all the warts that this team has, those two have been, I mean, immaculate. Doyle's already, and you see what the batting average does, because he hit 203 with 22 stolen bases last year. He's at 253 this year, and he's already at 19 stolen bases halfway through the year. So you're talking about a guy, if he can really keep growing at this rate, he might break Willy Taveras' stolen base record. I believe it's 68, and that I don't think that is so far out that he won't be able to ever touch that. I mean, Taveras did that in 2008, and so that was such a legendary season as far as stolen bases go. But Bretton Doyle feels like a guy who could break that record, and the fact that he's getting on base now, I think, is what's really helping him. And in many ways, it's helping the Rockies. And so he went from hitting at the bottom of the order to hitting at the top of the order, and that's what you want from your guys. That's what you want from your players, to just improve year over year. And his improvements they've been drastic. He's probably the most improved player on the entire Rockies roster.
You took mine because it was going to be Doyle, but I think my other one is Quantrill. I think, you didn't know what you were going to get from him. His ERA is under 4. He has 10 of his 17 starts are quality. He's clearly their best starter at this point. Freeland looked good yesterday again. But you never know what you're going to get with these guys when you trade for pitchers here, and I think he's been really solid for them all year.
And they gave up Cody Huff. It was a player-for-player trade. Cody Huff isn't above Double-A. He's never been above Double-A, and that's the guy they gave up for a guy who is now their best starter. He has the second most wins above replacement on the entire roster behind Tovar. I mean, Cal Quantrill's been awesome, and I don't know, it is a little bit of a surprise, but I do think if you looked at what his career was, this in some ways was a little predictable. He's been a really good pitcher his entire career. Cleveland got rid of him for a financial reason more so than his actual performance. And just in talking to Austin Gomber when I was writing a story about the two of them, he said, you know what? I do think it does something for a guy when a team says, we don't feel you're valuable enough for the money despite what you've done for us. And boy, could Cleveland use him now, because that rotation could really use Cal Quantrill in front of a really good bullpen. And those are just the type of guys where the Rockies seem to hit home runs on these small, under the radar, doesn't really make headline moves, and then they strike out wildly on the big moves. So maybe stick more to the smaller moves, like giving up minor leaguers who are never going to play for the Rockies for Nolan Jones, for Cal Quantrill, for these guys who, can bring so much value to your team. I mean, the Cal Quantrill trade, people can say what they want about Bill Schmidt, but if you actually look at the moves he has made, you cannot include Chris Bryant in that, because that is not a Bill Schmidt move. Bill Schmidt's been a pretty darn good GM, and the Cal Quantrill trade is just another stroke of, we're going to take a chance on a guy who we think can be really good, and it's worked out. I think Bill Schmidt's actually done a pretty good job, and I just don't feel that the hate that he gets is measurable to how well he's actually done.
He's guilty by association.
Yep, and that's the thing, right? And you can tell that the Chris Bryant move wasn't his, because if it was, he would have been out the door. He's already fired because of how bad that's aged. Yeah. I think the fact that he hasn't gotten fired does give you even more credence to something every reporter has heard in the building, which is that Dick Monfort is the one that called for that move.
And, Bill Schmidt has rebuilt this farm system. We've talked about it in the past. And I think I'm going to throw a curveball at you later about a most exciting prospect we can talk about too, maybe in the organization. But let's move to most disappointing.
It's Eleris Montero for me. I think so. Going into the offseason, all of the talk was he strikes out too much. And if he can cut down on the strikeouts, you're going to see that power really shine, because if you watch Eleris Montero take batting practice, and when he really connects with the ball, the guy has power. I mean, real legitimate power, but he cuts the strikeout rate from 36 to 22%, which is the biggest jump in the whole league. I mean, that is unheard of for a guy to do that. And every other stat has dropped with it. His on-base percentage has dropped. His slugging percentage has dropped. Every single number dropped around it, which is the exact opposite of what you would have expected to happen. And he just got designated for assignment because of it. And I think the Rockies actually held out longer than they maybe should have for him, because the production just hasn't been there. And he's not going to be an on-base guy. So if he's not hitting the ball hard and driving in runs, he really doesn't bring value to a lineup, because he's also not a very good fielder. And so when you include all of those things, him getting DFA'd the other day, I think was in some ways a positive sign for the Rockies, because it's a sign that they're not okay with, hey, you made an improvement here, but now you're a worse baseball player. They're not just going to hold on to that strikeout rate and just ride that. And I think in some ways that's encouraging. They bring up Aaron Schunk, who, he's had a pretty good minor league career. He's been around since 2019, and he's finally going to get a chance now. And I think that's what the Rockies need to do. You need to figure out what pieces are going to stay and what pieces you can afford to lose. And I seriously doubt anyone is going to claim Montero off of waivers. And, whether he elects free agency like Alan Trejo did, or he goes to AAA is, to be seen. But I think Eleris Montero is pretty established as a quad A player at this point. I just don't think he's not a Major League Baseball player.
So he is, of course, the second to last part of the Nolan Arenado deal. Austin Gomber is still on the team for now, of course. Boy, that deal is just a disaster.
Well, and you would never be able to get anyone to admit this on the record, right? But I do think if you had a little bit of truth serum, Montero gained a couple months, if not an extra year, because of that trade. Yep. I mean, you saw signs that he wasn't going to be a major league player. Last year, it's not like this is a new thing. So I think they even held on to him longer than they maybe should have, because of that trade. And that trade just has not worked out for either side. I mean, the Cardinals have not won a playoff game since. The last 2 years, they have really tanked. I mean, this is a winning franchise that has looked nothing like that in recent years. And so, man, that if nothing else, I mean, the fact that the Rockies got out of that money is great, but then you turn around and give it to Chris Bryant. So I don't even know if you really gained anything by what could have maybe been seen as a smart move if you never did the Chris Bryant deal.
We've all lost because of that trade. No.
Yeah.
My most disappointing is Justin Lawrence. I thought that maybe he
Yep,
was
that's
going to
fair.
seize the closer role, and
Hmm.
he just hasn't. Like he just has not. I mean, I know he missed some time. He was on paternity leave or whatever it
Hmm.
was too, a little bit.
Hmm.
Was that his leave?
Yeah, so he was on paternity leave, and then he also had a back
Yeah, he
shoulder
had something.
injury
Yeah.
that was also a hey, we want you to get a reset. It was a little bit of both. It was a real injury, but it's also an injury that, if you're pushing for a playoff spot, you may have been able to push through. But they gave him the reset, and I think the thing that is concerning about Lawrence is there just isn't confidence when he comes in the game. I mean, I don't feel his teammates are confident. I don't feel anyone's confident when he comes in a baseball game anymore. And like you said, it's with Daniel Bard out, Lawrence was supposed to be that guy. I mean, you had the sweeper, you have the arm angle, you have everything that could maybe make a good pitcher. But the fact that he doesn't have a changeup or anything that he can really do against lefties, I think really hurts him. That sweeper, it guys are watching it a lot more. It's been very erratic control wise. The sinker has been pretty easy to hit for opposing hitters, and you're right. I mean, Justin Lawrence was seen as, hey, this might be a key piece of our future bullpens. To man, I just don't know if he's going to be a winning player. I mean, I think it's easy to say, well, Justin Lawrence is part of the future, but it's easy to forget he's 29 years old.
Yeah.
He's not in this group of the rest of the guys like a Victor Vodnik who's 24. That's not Justin Lawrence. He's a guy that just really hasn't produced the way you would want him to. That's a fair pick for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this prospect one at you though, and I'm going to make it two-parter. Um, Most exciting prospect in the system, which I think we're going to agree on that one.
Mhm.
But who are you also excited to see in September?
I'm excited to see Drew Romo. I
Yeah.
really am, because the fielding last year, I mean, you're talking about a little bit of yips, a little bit of just learning curve, trying to get together, but he fixed his stance. He went to a one knee stance this year instead of both knees up. And I think it's really worked for him. I mean, the last time I checked, he didn't have any errors. That's probably changed since then. He may have one or two, but you think about a switch hitting catcher who's hitting for average and power, those guys just really don't come along very often. And if he can translate that to the majors, you're talking about a really powerful weapon in a switch hitting catcher. It's kind of along the lines of how powerful Michael Tolia could be if he really figures it out, because I think people forget how valuable switch hitters are. And so if Drew Romo can really translate his AAA success to the majors, I think he's going to be a blast. And if they deal, Elias Diaz, you might get to a point this season where you're paying your catcher's position almost no money and you're
Yeah.
getting some of the league's best production. I mean, Jacob Stallings makes $2 million. He's making nothing. And so I'm really excited for Drew Romo. I think it's been a long time coming. He's had to develop. He was a high school guy.
Yeah.
So he's had a lot of development, but I would think he's just one of the more exciting guys in their system right now.
Do we finally see Zach Veen in September?
I will say, before he sustained this back injury, he was getting very close. You're
Yeah.
talking he was along the lines of an Amador, who it's like, man, if you have that one injury that opens up that spot, you might see him. And so Zach Veen is very close. I mean, I would anticipate he'll debut this year as long as he can get back healthy. Obviously, back stuff is pretty troubling, but he's back playing games, I believe. He was just in the Arizona Complex League. So I mean, he's a guy that I really think could be a special guy, especially because he brings that speed element. And when you're a team like the Rockies who doesn't rack up hits the way you probably should, having speed on the base paths and having pitchers be concerned about that, that's a way that you can kind of overcome that. So Zach Veen's very exciting, and I would anticipate he'll debut this year. I really would.
He was tearing the cover off the ball in Double A. I just looked it up. 326
Yes.
in that
And
league.
that's arguably the hardest league in all of minor league baseball to hit in, and he was tearing it up. And when you have a guy doing that at Hartford, that's very encouraging, because I think people think of it as, well, it's like a tier. Double A is this level of player, triple A is a step up, major league. That's not really how it is. Double A in many ways is a harder league than triple A, because that's where people put all their amazing pitching prospects. That's where they put all these top prospects. So in a lot of ways, I don't think Zach Veen is going to see at bats at AAA. I think he's going to be like Amador, and he's going to go Hartford to Colorado.
Okay, so most exciting in the system, is it Chase?
Yeah, I mean, a pitcher that has that type of ceiling, I mean, that's pretty up there. That entire draft just looks better and better by the day because Jack Mahoney has been awesome this year, and he just threw a complete game shutout the other day. You have Sean Sullivan from that same draft, and then you have Chase. So you have three guys who have gone into the minors and done exactly what you would want them to do if they're going to be major league guys. And so I mean Chase is encouraging, if only for the fact that pitching is so hard to find in Colorado. And man, he's been good. He's been dominant. So I can agree. He's probably their most exciting guy.
Do we see him in Double A this year? Probably.
I would think so. They have a lot of good arms at Double A, and that's why I think he's being. I mean, when you think you have Hunter Van Scoy, you have Carson Palmquist, you have some guys at Double A that are really good pitchers, but those three that are all in the lower levels that I just brought up, I mean, those guys are pounding down the door. So if there's a spot that opens up, I would anticipate they're going to move up. I mean, I would think as an organization, you want to see all three of those guys pitch a Double A game before this year's over.
And where are we at on Yankeel now?
It's so odd with Yankeel. There was so much hype, obviously. I mean, you think back, he was in the Future Stars game.
Yeah.
He had an amazing throw in that game. So you started to think of nicknames for this outfield. You're like, man, Yankeel, Brenton, and Nolan. Those, I mean, you're talking, it's like Blake Street bazookas. Those are guys with just absolute cannons for arms. And I think in many ways, Zach Bean has passed Yankeel, and Jordan Beck obviously passed him as well. So I think in some ways, he's getting passed up by other guys. I don't know that he's so much getting worse himself, but Jordan Beck just, I mean, he was a star. He really was. And he's kind of getting to where he's going to come back soon. And the Rockies are very close to having Nolan Jones, Brenton Doyle, and Jordan Beck in that outfield. And I don't know, if I'm a Rockies fan, I mean, that has me giddy. That is such a fun three-man outfield. And if you could find a way to get Zach Bean up this year and have those four, Charlie is obviously going to lose at bats because of that. You're going to have guys like Jake Cave, who I think is going to get traded. So there's going to be some spots clear up. But, man, that's just such an exciting trio, and obviously quartet if you include, Zach Bean in there.
Yeah, Dollander has jumped Yankeel in their prospect rankings. He's on 3, and Jordan Beck's right behind him. But and then there's Sterling Thompson at 5. We never talk about.
Sterling Thompson, he's legit too. I mean, if I had to put just my opinion on it, I do think he's maybe the most valuable minor leaguer that they have in their system as far as trading to another team. The only problem he has is he's labeled as first base, but he really doesn't have a defensive position. He's just an amazing, really solid hitter. And so those are the type of guys you'll find a position for that guy, right? If you have to put him at first, you'll find a place to put him. But Sterling Thompson's often forgotten, and he is a really good baseball player. You brought up how Bill Schmidt has restocked this cupboard of minor leaguers. This is a top 10 farm system in all of baseball right now. This is a legitimately good system, and the Rockies haven't been able to say that for a while.
Okay, let's do team grade for the first half.
I wanted to give an F. I think that every part of this season so far just about has been a failure. There really has not been very many successes, but I think with the growth of Tovar, the growth of Doyle, kind of these encouraging signs, I gave him a D-. So as close as you can get to an F without being an F. But I do think this season has just, I mean, there's just been so many plays that are, I mean, it doesn't look like a Major League Baseball team some games. And that's just concerning. I understand that there's bumps that young guys are going to have to overcome. There's those hurdles along the way. But like I said, there are some games they just don't look like a Major League Baseball team. And that's at least somewhat concerning. I don't think that means they're doomed. I think that, there are some players that, like an Eleris Montero, who was part of the problem, you're going to see those guys start getting shipped out, and you hope this next wave is able to fix those things. But Man, this team's been bad. I mean, embarrassingly bad in many respects when you think about it's halfway through the season and they've already set the modern era record for 5 runs in the ninth inning. I mean, you going into it with a lead and allowing 5 or more runs, that's ludicrously bad. That is one of the most embarrassing stats in all of baseball. And then you include, they also have the modern era record for consecutive games trailing. And so when you're putting up these types of historical numbers in the worst first half in franchise history, I mean, if this isn't a D minus or an F, I just don't know what is.
Yeah, I agree with you. But so as an organization with the bump of the farm system, would you give it like a C minus, maybe D plus?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at their minor leagues, I give the minor leagues actually a much better grade. I mean,
Yeah.
Spokane has already, Spokane was an amazing team. I believe they started 8-0, 9-0. They're one of the best teams in high A. Hartford's been a really good team in double A. So their minor league system is very encouraging. But yeah, if you had to split up the grades, I'd probably give their minor leagues maybe a B. I mean, their minor league system has been very good this year. It just so happens that that's not the one that's on TV. That's not the one that's in the papers. Those are not the parts of the organization that are going to get the most spotlight. The major league team is, and the major league team, as we talked about, has really been an embarrassment.
Well, they start a homestand with the Brewers, who are first place in the NL Central. Could be not a great week start to the week for the Rockies. What do you got going for Insider this week?
So Insider this week, I think I'm going to try to get on the phone with Clint Hurdle. Haven't been able to get in contact with him, but I want to write about these young guys because Clint was just at Coors Field a couple weeks ago to kind of give here's what I'm seeing. He's still, managing a lot of just helping out with the minor leagues, doing some scouting reports, figuring out what guys need to do. Todd Helton joins him sometimes, but with Cooperstown this year, the trips have been a little more infrequent for Todd, but I mean, he came up, gave a report, and everyone that's worked with the minor leagues, including Todd, who Todd is not a guy that's going to blow smoke up anyone's rear. You know what I'm saying? He's a guy that's very straightforward. And his eyes lit up when he talked about the minor leagues. He said, there are some dudes in the minor leagues. There are some absolute studs. And so I think, I'll try to get on the phone with him because Clint Hurdle gets an inside look at it all the time, even more so than, you can just following it from afar.
Could this kind of mirror that 06, 07, 08, 09 run for the Rockies where you just have to wait and those guys are coming? The Brad Hops and all those guys were coming. Matt Holliday were coming. And then they finally got there and they did, they went to the playoffs twice.
If the Rockies are smart, I do believe that. I do believe they're in a position where if you're smart about these moves, I think you could do it. I really think that there is an upswing that could come, but you have to get rid of guys when they show you they're not major league players. You cannot keep playing out the string, trying to hope like they did with Montero. Like I said, I think they probably should have cut the rope on that a little sooner. They gave him a little more, leeway. And as long as they stop doing that and just if a guy shows you what he is, believe him. Don't try to project, oh, well, if he does this, this, and this, which, the 3 things they list are all super improbable, well, then he'll be a good player. It's, stop doing that. And I just don't think as an organization you can hold on to Gomber, Cal Quantrill after this. I think you need to trade them, and it's a very smart way. Everyone says, well, they could be part of the future. I just don't think so. I don't think so. You're talking about Cal, who's 29, and everyone likes to say, well, you should re-sign him. He's been good. I have seen zero indication that Cal Quantrill would stay in Colorado. I think he likes his teammates. I think he's a competitor, but I see no reason why he would stay in Colorado. Austin Gomber may, but Austin Gomber is 30 years old. And so just like a Lawrence, just like some of these guys that are kind of aging out of your core, you kind of need to move on. And so this trade deadline, I think, is a big one because while last year they made a lot of trades, this year they have much more valuable pieces they can get rid of than last year. And considering what Bill Schmidt did with less valuable pieces last year, this could be a really good trade deadline, or it could be another one where you look at it just like Story, just like John Gray, just like these guys who walked for nothing and say, you know what? That was a missed opportunity to gain some value from a couple guys that really stood out. So, I mean, this month is going to be very telling. You're talking, it's July 1st, July 30th is the deadline. So there's a month where, I mean, I really don't want to be hyperbolic, but it really feels like you can change the landscape of this franchise if you nail this trade deadline, and you could change it to next year we're a up and coming team, and then the following year we're a competitor for a playoff spot. I truly believe they can, but they have to manage this right. And recent years have shown me they might not, but there's still time left for them to do these moves. And if they're smart, I think it's the potential's there.
And if they want veteran leadership on the pitching staff, they have Kyle Freeland. They have
Yeah.
Herman's coming back. Like,
Yep.
you don't need those are Rockies. Like, those two guys are Rockies, not
exactly. And Herman Marquez, I mean, it's the report is that he's going to throw another minor league. He got shelled a little bit in his last AAA start, but touched 97 on the radar gun with his fastball. I mean, he's close. So he's going to start again in AAA this week, either the 4th or the 5th. Then you may see the next start be with the Rockies, but he's still trying to build up the pitch count. So they may, slow play this. But if Herman Marquez comes back and he's pretty good, you're just not even going to have enough spots for all these guys. So in some ways, that, might force your hand, and they'd be smart. Like I said, they'd be smart to take advantage of the value that some of these pieces have. And Cal Quantrill, I don't see how a contending team would not be interested in Cal Quantrill.
All right, make sure to check out Luke's coverage from Coors Field this week and his MLB Insider over at denvergazette.com. You subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. Every Monday, we talk baseball, and we'll continue to do that next week. So, Luke, I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for coming on.